We are live. This is episode 305 of the In the Tank podcast. We were talking about what else is new, COVID. A lot of new stuff going on with that. And maybe if we have time, which whenever I say that, we never have time, I do want to bring up net neutrality. Because I feel like there's an update to that story that might be interesting to get to. But before we do any of that, we're going to do this little trial run of our intro video that our producer, Andy, or a producer extraordinaire, Andy, who is actually MIA right now. I think he's flying to Las Vegas or something like that.
Indeed.
But he put this together. So let's see what you think. You know, for the audio listeners, you're only going to get one part of this, but there's a whole visual component. So if you want to see our faces, you want to put a face to the voice and all of that, you could always check out our live broadcasts of In the Tank. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube if you're just those audio listeners. So here, let's play this. Let's see how you guys react. Let us know what you think. Oh, I got to actually make it live. See, I'm my own producer today with Andy out. All right, here we go.
Hey, it's me.
Oh, fancy stuff. Fancy stuff. Justin, do you take offense that you're not second billing on this? And that's Jim? Jim's second billing on the podcast?
If it were up to me, the whole commercial would just be me anyway. So it would just be flashing shots of me with Jim with a sad face instead of a...
Wouldn't be hard to find a clip of me with a sad face. I'll say that.
Yeah, I'm just happy that I wasn't wearing like the same shirt that I was wearing in like half of those clips in there. So that's good. It makes it look like I have more than one shirt, which is
probably took them twice as long to make it just to avoid that.
Right. All right. Well, yeah. So let's know what you think. That might be our lead-in intro music from here on out. I guess we will see. But we've got a number of topics we want to get to. And the first thing I want to actually
you could introduce everybody on the podcast first, Donald.
Oh, yeah,
kind of going off format here, bud.
Wow. Donald Kendal, as always, your host, joined by Justin Haskins, editorial director. How you doing? Oh, I'm doing great, awesome. Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing? Oh, I'm doing great, awesome. Nate Myers, you are the development coordinator. How are you doing? Great, awesome. Moving on. All so right. Nate, Freedom Fest was this past week, and
it was indeed.
Out of all the four here, you were the lucky one to go down to that.
Oh yeah.
How was your experience at Freedom Fest?
Well, technically we went up, I think. Yeah, South Dakota. But it was great. I had a blast. It was my first time at Freedom Fest, so it was really cool to get that experience. I know it was kind of an off year because usually it is held in Vegas, but because Vegas's restrictions are kind of all over the place right now, seeing that they actually just reinstated their mask mandate for indoors, I believe. But yeah, so it was held in Rapid City, South Dakota, and we had a great time. There was, I believe, like 2,500 people or so that showed up.
Now,
go ahead.
Was this? Have you gone to many events like this?
A couple, yeah. I mean, I went to. I helped represent Heartland at CPAC in 2019.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about like the atmosphere of like one of the first post-pandemic lockdown events, or depending on how we feel about the main discussion of this episode, how it was like to be at the first post. The first post-first pandemic lockdown, pre-second pandemic lockdown event. Was it kind of timid? Was there an excitement in the air? How was the
vibe? I mean, these are all pretty hardcore libertarians that are there for the most part, so they were more than ecstatic, just to be out and doing something again, being able to congregate with one another and have a large scale event. So I think people were pretty amped up, just to kind of be getting back to normal. But yeah, I had a blast. I was able to meet Dave Smith, one of my favorite podcasters, so that was cool. Also saw Dave Rubin and Joe Jorgensen was there, which was interesting.
Nice.
But yeah, it was fun.
Sweet. Jim, you didn't go mostly because it was in Vegas, I assume.
Or no, it wasn't in Vegas. It was in.
That's what I said. That's why you
Oh,
didn't
yeah,
go.
because
It
all that it wasn't in
Vegas.
Yeah, no. I've been to several Freedom Fest. I thought Nate deserved to have a spin, and he had a great time.
I see how
Appreciate
it is. Okay.
He was generous
cool.
of me. You should not.
Of
Yeah,
course.
you should be more
Yeah.
thankful.
All right. Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, that's interesting. I know that we've got a bunch of more things lined up. The International Conference on Climate Change 14 happening in Vegas in October. What are the dates on that? The 15th through the 17th, I believe.
Exactly.
Boom, nailed it. See, I'm a pro. We got that. We got the Heartland Benefit Dinner, which is happening in September the 25th, right?
24th.
242?
24th. Close.
Dang it. All right. Well, whatever. So it looks like there's going to be more of these events happening, and I'm just kind of curious if there was just a little bit of hesitation in the air, because this is still COVID time, right? But
I mean, not from our crowd, but I don't think you're going to get much hesitation from our crowd anyway.
not only was everyone shaking hands, but they were all hugging and kissing each other on the cheeks. Is that what
Oh
you're
yeah,
saying?
yeah. I mean, just without being too graphic. Yeah.
All right. The other thing that's kind of going on in the world is Olympics. So I don't watch too much Olympics. If it's on TV or something at some place that I'm at, I'll watch it, of course, but I don't really seek it out. But I'm sure that Jim is fired up about some handful of Olympic stories. Surely there's some stories out there of some Olympians kneeling during the anthem or turning their back on the flag. So, is there, Jim? Fill me in.
To be honest, I don't know. I mean, that's the only things about the Olympics that I do know is that the women's soccer team got smoked 3-0 by Sweden in their opening round game after kneeling and after basically an entire year of basically putting out the vibe that they're embarrassed to even be representing the United States and to have then to have them lose, and not just lose but get blown out in their first game. I gotta admit, I kind of liked it. I kind of liked the idea. I was not
Jim,
upset.
rooting against America. Got it. All right.
Well, no, not rooting against America. Not getting all excited about people who are representing America who, in their public statements, apparently don't like America very much and think there's the big problems with America.
Right.
So I don't know. To be honest, I'm actually boycotting pretty much the entire Olympics. I see notices on my phone on what's happening. I have not watched a millisecond of coverage, despite the fact that there are some things about the Olympics that I'd be interested in watching, like the tennis and the golf and maybe swimming. But I've decided to boycott the Olympics this year. If so many people on the teams don't really care that much about representing America, why should I care about watching them?
Well, people in the comments sound off if there's like specific storylines or stories that you're interested in that have something to do with the Olympics, because I'm honestly pretty ignorant of it. Like I said, I'm not seeking it out at all. Justin, Nate, have you been watching anything?
No, like Jim. I mean, I haven't really been like purposefully boycotting the Olympics, but kind of going along with what Jim said. I noticed how woke everything was this year, leading up to it. So I just kind of tuned out and checked out. But
and there's nobody in the stands. There is nobody in attendance. I mean,
right.
It's kind of hard. Back during COVID time, when you would try to watch a baseball game or a football game, and there's like no crowd noise and no engagement with the crowd, it makes the entire event kind of boring to be honest.
Right.
So
it sounds like you're watching practice.
It's a glorified high school like track meet at that point.
Yeah, but I don't like really care about like the whole athletes kneeling stories over the past couple of years. I mean, I find it annoying for a few reasons, but like generally I can care less about how some multimillionaire athlete is trying to expand their brand. And this is like especially the case in US sports, some NBA, some MLB, some NFL player wants to kneel because of some perceived injustices in the country. Whatever. Great. I don't care. Be a ruthless self-critic. Whatever floats your boat. But the exact same behavior, but on the international stage of the Olympics,
a little bit different. Yeah,
it is absolutely different. It is ridiculous to me. So you're going to protest against one of the freest countries in the world on the international stage while you're standing next to athletes that represent China and Saudi Arabia, Venezuela,
right,
Egypt, Iran, Sudan. Like it seems like it's a little tone deaf.
Right,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, I someone mentioned this in the comments, and I was going to mention it as well. One of the bigger stories coming out of the Olympics right now is our former gold medalist gymnast Simone Biles. Yes, yeah, she pulled herself out of a couple of events due to a mental condition that gymnasts get called the Twisties. I don't know too much about it, but it apparently is like a thing where, like, when you're doing a backflip or some kind of flip midair, you get like the really strong urge to twist your body, which, you know, like if you land wrong doing a flip like that can like break your neck. So she put herself out, and it's caused like a whole big, you know, like crap storm on the internet, because some people are, you know, making fun of her and saying she should have, you know, like toughed it out, and other people saying, you know, give her a break.
Right.
You know, she's doing the best she can.
Well,
I don't know.
Well, Justin, what do you think about my making a distinction between, like, you know, national sports and then the international stage when it comes to these protests of like America?
Well, I mean, I don't know that it's any less ridiculous necessarily, given the fact that the people who are kneeling in the United States to protest, you know, whatever they're protesting that particular week, are wearing their, you know, their China-made shoes and their China-made jerseys and their Bangladesh-made hats and everything else while they're doing that. So it's sort of like, you know, if you really care so much about human rights and all these other things, then maybe you should stop buying these products made by people who are not free in countries where they have no rights and get executed for possession of marijuana. Maybe you shouldn't be buying from those countries anymore. But they have no problem with that. In fact, they do everything in their power to make sure that, especially China, is pleased with them and happy with them, and that they don't say anything to upset their future Chinese overlords.
Right.
But, you know, so I mean, so is it any less ridiculous than that? No, not really. It is perhaps more overtly ironic that, you know, you've got people protesting, you know, with Iranians in the audience and Saudi Arabians. I mean, do they allow women to drive cars there yet? I can't remember. I think they just started doing that a few years back.
Yeah, just
Saudi
Arabia.
It's a big deal too. It
is a big deal, and that's the thing, right? So here we are. We've got women athletes from America protesting their own country, while people from other countries are not even able to drive their own cars because of their gender. And it seems to me that if I was a female athlete in the Olympics, that might be something worth talking about. you know, like how women are like second-class citizens in a bunch of countries in the world.
Right. The irony of privilege involved in that is apparently lost on a bunch of people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So here's I came up with an idea for a poll. Okay, Justin, maybe we consider this for the next time we do one of these Rasmussen polls. Out of the 165 countries that are out there, you know, all the fact checkers will come at me. No, it's 163. Where is the United States rank in terms of human rights? And my hypothesis is that the right would rank it more accurately in the top, 20 or so, whereas the left will rank it somewhere in the middle of the pack, if not in the lower half. What do you think of that poll idea, Jim?
It's possible.
Well, who's going to give you the answer? By whose ranking on human rights would the United States, you know, be ranked? I mean,
we'd have to do
we're number one.
We have to do Cato Institute's Human Freedom Index or something like that.
Okay. I don't know about that, Jim. I mean, we only legalized gay marriage in like the mid 2000s, and we still conduct the drug war and endless wars and a bunch of other civil liberty issues. So I don't know if I would say we're number one.
I'll let Cato decide it, but Justin, what do you think of that hypothesis of mine?
Yeah, I would say that's very possible. I mean, we live in two very different universes. I'm not saying that America is perfect; it's far from perfect. But if you believe everything that people on the left tell you, you would think that America is the most racist, homophobic, bigoted country that has ever existed on the face of the planet, that was built on the backs of slaves, and that every single institution in America is full of systemic racism, even though they're run by the very same people who claim that systemic racism is pervasive throughout all of these systems. And so, I mean, yeah, I think that there is this. I do think that we live in two alternate universes, and I don't think that the left's version of the universe is supported by any sort of objective data. I think it is just their ideology mixed with their political ambition, and that's the primary thing that we have going on here. Now, with all of that said, I think it would be interesting to see, are they so detached from reality that they would put us in the middle of the pack of, say, like 92 countries? I don't know. That's a good question, because that's pretty far down. I mean, could you really come up with like 80 countries that are worse than America?
Right.
Even if you're a leftist, you would think that would be hard, but who knows? Honestly, nothing would shock me at this point.
I mean, as I mentioned a couple minutes earlier, I have plenty of qualms with the degree of freedom that we have in America. But even as a hardcore libertarian, as I am, I wouldn't put us below countries like, I don't know, Slovenia or Belarus or many of the Eastern European countries. Like, we obviously have more freedom than them. Most of Latin America, places like that.
Right. So I pulled it up here. Human Freedom Index. This is from the Cato Institute. This is their 2020 report. They do one of these every year. And they break it down by 3 different metrics: personal freedom, economic freedom, and human freedom. I don't know what the difference between personal freedom and human freedom is, but they aggregate these things together. And according to them, and this is out of a list of 162 countries.
There's more countries than that.
Maybe those are the only ones that they actually do. We rank number 17, tied with the UK.
That was my guess. Yeah.
Now, this is Cato Institute, and I would assume that a lot of the things that they're dinging the United States on are things that we probably all disagree with and would be advocating for. Like one of the metrics is size of government, right? Like, we're probably all for the reducing the size of government. That would up us up this list, but
right.
But looks like number 1 is New Zealand. So, freest country in the world.
Wait a minute. Now, this all has to be done before all this COVID panic nonsense that's gone across the globe.
Yeah,
probably.
New Zealand is basically a prison country right now, and has been for almost 2 years. Like, you can't get in, you can't get out, you got to wear masks. I mean,
right.
I know this is actually a nice segue to transition into one of our main topics here today, is like these, the COVID and COVID lockdowns returning, and mask mandates and vaccine mandates and all of that stuff. New Zealand, number 1. If you include all this COVID nonsense, they probably should be at least 30 at the highest. I mean, good grief.
Yeah, Hong Kong is number 3, and they're like under siege. So
Hong Kong is number 3.
Yeah.
Economic freedom is pretty high over there, or used to be.
Yeah, no
We're
doubt.
Singapore. Is that in the top 5?
Singapore.
That's interesting. They got great economic freedom, but they have. What is that?
28.
Yeah, because they don't have a lot of personal freedom in Singapore.
I was about to say
economic freedom.
You can do anything you want economically in Singapore, but if they catch you with a gram of weed, I'm pretty sure you get 30 years in prison or something. It's something outrageous.
Yeah. So that's my hypothesis. Maybe we'll do a poll like that in the future. But yeah, you're right, Jim. That was a decent enough segue to get into what is quickly becoming just our weekly COVID update. I mean, I don't know. I've been trying to be resistant about talking about COVID on a basically weekly basis, but it continues to be a headline issue. I was hoping that we would be able to wean ourselves off of this like 6 months ago or 8 months ago or 10 months ago, but here we are. So I don't know what to tell you. We discussed the new Delta variant a few weeks back. It appears as though it's a more contagious version of COVID, but maybe less deadly. People are freaking out because case numbers are going up in countries and states around the world, while ignoring the fact that death rates are not following that trend. We covered in length an article from, I think, the Huffington Post about that was titled how to tell if you have the Delta variant or the seasonal hay fever. So it just kind of shows you how serious that this is being taken. The percentage of people in the United States that have been fully vaccinated is 49% and growing. But despite all this, governments and agencies are scrambling to increase COVID restrictions regardless of your vaccination status. Justin, you and I talked about, you weren't on that episode where we talked about the Delta variant, but you and I talked the other day about it. And you had a very similar experience to the one I had when I was browsing through headlines in Twitter, did you not?
Yeah, I did. So I have all these notifications pop up on my phone talking about the Delta variant and how its cases are spreading all over the country, and we're having these gigantic increases in cases in where I live, and how this is a huge problem. And so, you look at the graphs and stuff and these various charts that are shown, and there's no doubt about it. I mean, cases are dramatically increasing compared to before. Of course, deaths are not dramatically increasing,
exactly.
Which is really the thing that people should be most concerned with. But the thing that bothered me the most was not that the cases were going up and that the deaths were staying flat, but the media wasn't doing a very good job of reporting it. That's bad enough on its own. But the real thing that concerned me was the reaction that people were having on social media to these stories. I mean, reading people's reactions to this was truly unbelievable.
Well, that's what I mean, man.
They were essentially calling for forced vaccinations. Yep. There were people of all people, not just through employment, but just like everybody, forced vaccinations. We had people saying, lock everything down again right away. We had people saying, one woman said that it's enough is enough. We need to start bullying our friends and family. Bullying is the word she used. Yeah. Bullying our friends and family. There were other people saying
we need to start bullying them because they haven't yet.
Yeah, they haven't been bullied enough apparently.
We've been so nice about it up until now.
Right. I mean, I'm like, my God. I mean, this is where we're at now because cases have gone up. Deaths are not really going up substantially, but just the mere information that cases are starting to go up. Not that the cases have reached the levels that they were at before or that they're even close to the levels they were at before. It's just that they're going up. And because of that alone, we need to start imposing like every draconian rule we can possibly think of.
That didn't work over the last 14 months.
Right. And this is the thing, and this is really the thing that struck me the most, that I think could potentially become a huge civil liberties issue going forward, is the last time around when all this stuff was happening or locking everything down, we have all this stuff, whatever you think of that, whatever, you might happen to think of the things that we did and whether they were reasonable or how long we should have been doing them or whatever, there was nobody that really could be blamed for the existence of COVID, right? It wasn't, there was no one who could be, I mean, China obviously looks like this was involved in it, but there was nobody in America that people were going to point at and say, well, it's your fault that COVID's here. But there is now. This is what's happening. We've now there is a scapegoat class of people in this country. It's the people who refuse to get vaccinated. That's how this is shaping up. And those people, they're the reason. They're the reason why. If COVID continues to go on, it's their fault. And they should be punished. And they should have to deal with repercussions. And they should have to pay for more money. You would be shocked at how many people on social media were making posts saying health insurance companies should start charging these people more money because they didn't get vaccinated, which I thought was hilarious because that is illegal under Obamacare. That's one of the main things Obamacare did was make it impossible for health insurance companies to charge people more money based on risk. That was the whole point. That's what the left wanted. Now they're demanding that we do that for people who don't get vaccinated. So I guess only certain kinds of risks are acceptable. But this whole idea of the scapegoat class, like that's the thing that really concerns me. That didn't exist before, but it will exist this time around. And I don't know. I mean, we've seen this in the past for thousands of years when a certain group of people, not just a singular person or whatever, but a group of people are deemed to be the cause of everybody else's misery. Those people are often abused in the absolute worst ways imaginable. And the language that people are using, regular people already, without even seeing an increase in deaths, is very disconcerting. If we actually do start to see returns to previous levels of people dying and stuff like that, can you imagine what they're going to say about these people who didn't get vaccinated? I am very worried about that. Very, very worried.
Right. Well, and I'm curious going forward, Justin, how they are going to balance kind of their conflicting narrative that they have going on right now. Because on one hand, you're right, they're gearing up to start blaming the unvaccinated for, all of America's woes. But on the other, they're also saying that vaccinated people can still spread COVID. And so that's why they need to put the masks back on. So it's like, how are you going to balance between the unvaccinated are the problem and everybody has to put masks back on and lock down because even if you're vaccinated, you can still spread and catch this disease?
Yeah. I mean, it's at this point, and I think this has really been the theme of the COVID era, is that you start with whatever regulation or restriction or policy you want, and then you come up with a justification for it afterwards.
Yeah.
Right.
That's pretty much how this works.
Yeah.
There's no real scientific evidence behind a lot of the things that happened, as we've now found out about social distancing, for example. The MIT study that says there's no difference between, if you're inside, there's no difference between being 6 feet away and 60 feet away. You're going to get COVID if you're indoors and at the same rate, regardless, right? But how many businesses were shut down or restricted in terms of the number of people who could be in the room based on that one theory, based on that one idea?
Well, and the worst part about it is, did we learn from it? No, apparently not.
No.
One of the first stories that I have here, one of the first official stories, revolves around the CDC and their new recommendation to reinstate indoor mask mandates in high-risk areas. So many cities are either considering this reinstatement of the mask mandates, like Chicago. Others have already done it, like LA. And as mentioned in this Washington Post article, which I have linked in the show notes, this type of mandate will surely stoke anxieties and likely persuade people from going to restaurants and other public areas. So restaurant owners that have been struggling over the past 17 months can't catch a break. They reference other industries that are also kind of feeling this already, including tourist spots that are seeing less tourists and people already delaying their already delayed weddings at wedding venues and other stuff like that. So the economic ramifications of this, and again, it's just these policies that have been like you said, the social distancing and all of that, and the mask mandates, all of this we haven't learned from our experience over the past 17 months, but we're still going to go down this road. Jim, that seems like classic Jim rant fodder for you.
Yeah, trademarked from our fan Walemsa. So yeah, what we've learned over the past almost 2 years now is that our government is at turns incompetent and also devious. This is, they're trying to scare us again. It's not going to work. The other day, you remember Rochelle Walensky? She's the head of the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. And she, what was it? It was like, was it March or something? She said she had a sense of impending doom for America. And so, oh my gosh, that's awful. Impending doom. Millions maybe would die. 3 months later, she's on Rachel Maddow's show with a smile on her face saying, things are looking up. People are getting the vaccine. You don't have, if you take the vaccine, you can get your life back and you can take your masks off.
We need a carrot on a stick.
Biden's out there saying those same sorts of things like, hey man, get your vaccine. You get your life back. You can take your mask off. If you get vaccinated, you're not going to get COVID, which is not true. Even if you've had COVID in the past, you need to get the vaccine. So go ahead and get the vaccine and you can, basically have all of your liberties back. Thank you for cooperating and participating in what we needed to do to get control of this virus, because Joe Biden said on the campaign trail, I have a plan. Not that Trump guy doesn't have any plans. I have a plan. We're gonna eliminate this virus. None of that was true. Nobody should have ever believed any of it. And now they've just kept changing their story. And they wonder why people are vaccine hesitant. Is because their messaging is all over the damn place. And if you happen to get the vaccine like I have done, there are absolutely now, thanks to these new mandates that you have to mask up, we're going to have kids in masks again, even though they don't get COVID that often. And when they get it, they're just so mild. Most kids don't even notice. The survival rate overall for this virus is 99.9%. This is not a Black Death event. This is basically a flu that is very severe for a certain percentage of the population. And yet here we go again. They think they are going to be able to lock us down, and they're going to try. I live in a blue state, unfortunately, and so I predict my governor, Commissar Pritzker here in Illinois, is going to go ahead and do all these lockdowns again and tell people that your business is not essential. You need to close. You can't have as many people in your restaurant as you did for the last 2 months because of the Delta variant. None of this stuff people are vaccine hesitant, and people are fed up because there is no consistency on the message. And you know why? Because people actually don't even know what is going on with this virus. It is too new. There have not been enough studies on these vaccines, so we don't know how effective they are to natural immunity, but our government says that they know the answers. When they don't, they keep changing all of these things. The American people are not going to put up with this, and I kind of disagree with you a little bit here, Justin. I think this is the civil rights issue of our generation and of our time. This is the most severe civil rights crisis that most of us have experienced in our lives. And I'm 51 years old. The time is right now, and we need to resist. There are people protesting in France and in Germany and in Australia. They're taken to the streets to say no more lockdowns. You have no authority to do this, especially considering that the coronavirus is not some kind of black plague. And it has to end. And these demonstrations like that should be happening in the United States soon if these governors are dumb enough to actually try to go back to lockdown again. The American people finally, I would hope, will not put up with it anymore.
So just real quick. Number one, all those protests you're talking about in Europe to stop, did that actually stop any of the mandates from going into place?
In some places, yes, it has.
Not in France.
Well,
even though they filled the streets full of people, and they still impose the mandates that they are going to.
So that's actually the example I was going to use. While you're correct, and like the mandate still went through, they had to severely revise it. So like they had originally they were going to be charging store owners like 40,000 euros every time they let an unvaccinated person into their store. They were going to sentence people to like 6 months in jail for trying to enter a store unvaccinated. Now they've walked all of that back. Now it's like, I think it's like a 1,000 euro fine per person. I mean, it's still a lot, and it's still outrageous and a huge violation of people's like property rights and civil liberties. Don't get me wrong, I'm still angry about it, but those protests have had some effect. It's not like they were ineffective completely.
Okay, so let me just, this is going to be controversial. All right. So, but
on this show, really?
It's going to be a little controversial, but I just want you to hear it out in full, okay, before Jim loses his mind and dies of an aneurysm. From the perspective of a person who is in one of these bureaucratic roles, whether it's the head of the CDC or governor of some state or whatever. Jim looks at this and says, and many others too, look at this and say, you guys are constantly giving us these different messages. You are telling us we need to lock everything back down again. You're fear mongering. You're doing all this stuff. Okay, I understand all of that. Fine. But the alternative is what? That we don't do that. And then if something happens, those people will undoubtedly be dragged through the streets and tarred and feathered as the people that caused all of these things to happen. So every single person who ever dies, whoever gets sick, is going to be pinned on those people. We see this over and over and over and over and over again. If you are in one of these, no, hold on. Hold on. Wait a second.
You're talking politics.
Wait a second. This is all politics. Everything's politics. This is the whole issue. You're sitting there blaming them for doing something when they're in a no-win situation. In reality, they're not in a win. They can't win. If they do what you want, Jim, then the other half of the country will hate them. If they do what that part of the country wants, then you'll hate them. They're going to be hated no matter what.
Wrong.
Wait, hold on. Wait a minute. Let me finish. The problem now, I'm not trying to say, well, then that means this is all fine. The problem is the system. That's the problem. The fact that we have a big, gigantic national government making all of these choices, handing down, these edicts from Washington, D.C., telling us how we should all live our lives. Like, that's the issue. Okay? The issue is the system. But the people who are in the system, I mean, I have a hard time believing that if any of you were put in a position where you're going to be blamed by everybody for all of the media is going to turn to you and blame you for every single death that occurs from this point forward, that you would not be more cautious than you would otherwise be. I find it very hard to believe that would be your position would be, nope, open up everything. And then if COVID runs wild, you're going to be the one that's blamed for all those deaths. And you're going to turn around and say, well, yeah, oh, well, I guess that's my job. Who cares? No, I don't think so. Like, I think you would be worried by that.
I've got two responses to that. One is I've always thought, like, shouldn't like politicians and all this, policymakers, like, prescribe to the same like Hippocratic oath that like doctors have to do, where it's like, at first do no harm type of thing. So like the default position should be one of liberty, right? So that's my first thing. Okay. But in practical terms, because that's probably more of an idealistic approach or something, which I'm fine with, but I get it. The voters aren't necessarily. But like, how about just learning from it? Like I see what you're saying. I think that's a very valid argument for like the first 3 months of all of this. But maybe we start learning from the policies that we're putting in place and learning from like the seasonal flu is actually more deadly for people that are under 40. Well, maybe we loosen up the restrictions for people under 40 and we make sure that all the resources are in place to take care of the people that are actually in danger from this. And we go to that Great Barrington proposal or whatever that we've talked about on this podcast a number of times, or the way that Sweden has done it. It's like, I think that if you start learning from your the past and start proposing policies that are in line with what we have learned over the past couple of months, then I could give you that leeway that you're asking for.
This suggests that people base their decisions on who to blame based on the evidence and data, when in reality they don't. They base it on whomever, whatever the media tells them to blame it on, that's what they blame it on. So the idea that you could say, well, look at all this evidence and data, and can't they just come out and say, well, we've learned from our mistakes? Not if the media decides that that's not the right course of action. The media is the one that gets to decide who's to blame for. The media will decide if you are to blame for the deaths of millions of people, potentially, theoretically, or hundreds of thousands or whatever, or whether you're the savior that prevented hundreds of thousands or millions of people from dying. The media will actually get to make that decision.
Justin,
and so if you're in this position, if you're in that position of being potentially blamed for hundreds of thousands or millions of people dying, it's really easy to say, you know what? I'm always going to take whatever the course is that makes it harder for them to blame all of this on me.
If you truly believe in the science, though, you follow it.
They don't believe on the science. No. Their only science is politics.
Texas governor, right, undid that mask mandate back in March, right?
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh my gosh, Neanderthal thinking, right? Biden called it Neanderthal thinking. This is going to lead to a giant spike in cases in Texas. Didn't happen. So you're vindicated by the reality, though.
No, wrong. The reality is shaped by the media. The reason why he was vindicated in Texas was because most Texans wanted that. It was politically possible for him to do it. You're not vindicated by data ever in the minds of the media. The media decides. This is a country where we believe that we have a crisis of African Americans being mowed down by police because there's 18 people a year who are shot and killed. So no, the reality is not shaped by the data. The reality is shaped by the media. That's the whole point.
I 100% agree with Justin. I know that may be a hot take. Right? No, he's exactly right. He's not defending these idiots in office who are bending to public pressure and the whatever way the wind is blowing that day. That's just the reality that we face. Americans base their political opinions based off of headlines. They don't even read the frickin' articles anymore. Anyways, that aside, I just have to say what Justin originally described sounds like an ideal scenario to me. We would have kept our civil liberties and politicians would have got tar and feathered in the street. I mean, that sounds ideal to me. I mean, but that's just my hot take.
I don't know.
There are
Go.
citizens of the United States who have their civil liberties taken from them. Those people are called criminals. And you're either under house arrest or you are put in jail, and you have some of your civil liberties obviously taken away. Your freedom of movement, for instance, if you're in prison. Our politicians and our media went along with basically imprisoning the entire country when they did nothing wrong. And now we have spent the last year, doing our best to do everything we are told and everything that we think makes sense to be able to, basically get out of jail when we haven't done anything wrong. You know what? Even the people that are not getting the vaccine haven't done anything wrong either. And now we are going back to a system in which our media and the public are going to accept being treated as if they've committed crimes when they have done nothing of the sort. And people, we need to resist this. You need to, we're entering the school year again. And basically, Joe Biden gave the teachers unions all the power again. Yeah. Your kids are going to summer camps and things, and they're outside and they're even inside with masks off, and they're able to, basically get back to a normal life. And now Joe Biden has basically made it so that the teachers unions can basically, it'll be remote learning again in many places because of what the federal government just said and what the federal government is lying about in this pandemic right now. And again, just the bottom line, the reason this is all being done again right now is for you're right, Justin, it's for politics. It's actually for the election. The Democrats need it so that we are all in a COVID panic again, so that they can basically do a no rules, make it up as you go along election cycle again, because there's been some stories. I think Politico had one there where a Democratic operative basically admitted we're screwed. We're screwed if actual elections are held normally again. We're screwed. And so that's what this is really all about. The Democrats and Joe Biden and the deep state and everyone in Washington is trying to set the stage again for a no rules election so that the Democrats don't lose the House and or the Senate in 2022.
I really think they screwed themselves in this last election. I mean truly, because they banked everything on the defeat of Donald Trump. Everything else just didn't matter. So, I mean, they barely won the House. They broke even in the Senate, and they were able to win the presidency by, I mean, it was like the most heavily participated election in U.S. history. I'm trying to remember, we had a huge turnout. I think it was around 70% of the population. But even then, it was a slim margin. They won by 10 million votes. It wasn't that much.
Yeah, and 15% of the population voted twice.
Right,
it was
exactly.
a joke, YouTube. Don't take us down. It was a joke.
Anyways,
it was a joke.
But yeah, no, they're gonna have a tough time in 2022 with the congressional elections, and in 2024, I think they're also screwed. I mean, I truly think they threw the baby out with the bathwater with this one. They doubled down on some absolutely horrendous policy decisions. They threw their weight behind Black Lives Matter and the lockdowns and all of this. And I think that's going to come back to bite them.
Well, they're also trying to run away from
defunding the police. Yeah. They tried
What universe? What universe is anyone going to believe that? No, it was actually Republicans that were pushing defund the police.
I mean, my position as a hardcore libertarian. I think Republicans are just as horrendous on police policy as Democrats, just from the opposite end. But even I was scratching my head when they were like, "Oh yeah, no, it was the Republicans all along that wanted to defund the police."
It's so silly.
I was like, no. They may want a stronger police state, but certainly not to defund the police.
Yeah, it's so it looks like everything's back on the table in terms of COVID restrictions. I already talked about the mask mandates. It seems like vaccine passports are being kind of bandied about as potential options here. That was a big topic of discussion about a month ago, but this article from the Federalist, again, everything we talked about you can find in the show notes. Rochelle Walensky openly endorsed vaccine passports as a potential path forward, and said that, quote, I think some communities are doing that, and that may very well be the path forward, she said, also talking about the mask mandates. So it looks like vaccine passports are back on the table. Joe Biden looks like, or people are expecting him to announce that federal workers will be required to get a COVID vaccine or submit to testing, which I was kind of surprised that wasn't already mandated. Like, if he's got the power to do that, and I don't know that he does, I'm not really sure what the constitutional, precedent is for something like that. But if they have the ability to say, if you work for the government, you have to get a vaccine, why wouldn't they have done that like months ago?
Yeah.
Can anyone answer that?
Well, no, that's a good question. I mean, it's not like the
probably
Constitution
things
actually
were-
matters anymore, but
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think it was probably just because things were moving in the right direction, and they probably figured why have bad press?
I
and
guess,
open
but-
myself
right.
up to criticism when we don't have to.
I don't know, but the vaccine passport was being talked about a couple of months ago too. So, it's just like,
yeah, but that's kind of like the White House administration putting out feelers. They do that sometimes. They'll throw out.
but they're talking about mandating vaccines and having people go door to door. It's like
Right.
the easiest thing they could do is you work for the government, you get a paycheck from us, you gotta have to get a vaccine.
Right.
Yeah, but they probably didn't want their own people protesting against them.
Right.
Well, I
If
mean,
they
that
have an
just
internal
highlights another
revolt,
problem with all
yeah.
this bureaucracy.
which is a pretty. I'm actually
special
kind of
interests.
amazed that they're doing it. Really, when you think about it from that perspective, right? This is an important demographic for them.
Yeah.
There's tons of federal workers, and they live in some pretty important parts of the country. In some cases, like in Northern Virginia, for example. And do you really want to alienate maybe 30, 40, 50% of those people?
No,
I mean,
just
that's-
alienate the people that aren't going to vote for you anyways. That's-
Yeah, that's usually how it works.
Right,
We alienate the
just
people who
terrible.
won't vote for you anyway.
Well-
I don't want to you know what? I won't. We'll save this for another episode. But remind me, Dono, we need to have a discussion about this whole concept of civil liberties and mandated vaccines and all of that stuff, because I think there is. I'm not saying that I support vaccine mandates, but if you have, let's say we had a virus that really was killing like literally everybody who got it. Like, let's say that existed, okay? And that was the case. Would you support mandated vaccines then?
No.
If literally every person, so literally you would rather have everybody die than
No.
have, of course not.
No,
You would
because,
support having it.
Because I bet under that scenario, a lot of people would voluntarily get that vaccine.
You wouldn't need to
have
mandate it if
Maybe-
it was a deadly
Right.
virus like that.
But what if?
Yeah.
But what if? But no. What if there were
People would be
who
people would be
refused?
stabbing the person in front of them in line to get that damn vaccine.
And they
if it-
die.
the
Well, they
disease is
die.
like
It's a
that.
personal choice.
That and if you don't get the vaccine and it has a 100% death rate, then you die and you don't have to worry about that person anymore. And the people who are
it's
vaccinated
no-
are fine because
it's
they're
no
vaccinated.
different to me
Not
than,
if not if they
seatbelt
infect
laws.
not if they infect people before they die, obviously. So that would
Okay.
be But the point that I'm making is not. I'm using an extreme example. Obviously,
Well,
let's
no,
say it's
no,
not
you're right.
100%
You're right.
death rate. I'm saying if it was much deadlier,
You're right.
than
We
this
should save
current
this
one.
for a future episode because
But it
surely,
is. But that's the key issue.
surely
really.
this will be a story when they inevitably do mandate everyone get a vaccine. Probably in, let me check my watch, 2 months from now. So yeah, we'll talk about it then.
Well, wait, I think this is actually a way to talk about another aspect of this whole thing, and it's the idea of risk and how dangerous this virus is. Now, the Delta variant, it is supposedly much more contagious, which is kind of scary considering that the original COVID variant was considered really contagious as well. But it's the idea, again, the death rate for this, and and the Delta variant, most people that have already had COVID maybe have Delta variant and not even know it at all, or if they have any symptoms at all, it's very, very mild. But we are now operating as a society right now that seemingly cannot handle any risk whatsoever. The risk of death, especially going back to children, having to mask up or maybe even have to have remote learning again next year. Children are they're at such low risk to COVID, Delta variant or not, and we act as if like that's the slightest risk, like a percentage of a percentage point danger to children. That's too much risk for us. That's too much. If one child gets COVID and gets sick and perhaps dies, we have to do everything we can to prevent that. Our society is sick. That is a mental illness to have that kind of mentality as a society, that you can't handle any risk. and the risk of death from this COVID variant is so small for the vast majority of people in America, because about half of us, I guess, have been vaccinated, and then a lot of people that haven't been vaccinated are not in a high risk, pre-existing condition group.
Right.
Yet still, we have this idea that like there's nothing we shouldn't do to reduce the risk down to zero. That's madness. And there is never any discussion about what the costs of all of these things are. There is a cost to locking down society. There is a cost to basically turning hospitals into COVID-only zones. There are people that they're still not getting cancer treatments. People have died of cancer because they couldn't get it treated in a timely manner because of COVID. Nobody ever talks about that. You're right, Justin. The media controls all of this stuff. There's no stories on CNN about the real costs of COVID policies that have health effects on other people. There are no discussions on MSNBC about the huge spike in drug overdoses and suicides, especially among children. None of this stuff is talked about. And we act as a society that there is no cost to just trying to do the right thing to keep people protected. It's crazy. And at least we're talking about it on this podcast, but because we have to, there is risk in life. And there has to be a discussion about what is an acceptable risk and what are the acceptable, from a civil liberties standpoint and a practical standpoint, steps that should be taken to mitigate that risk. We don't have those discussions anymore.
I agree with you.
Discussions, and he was accused of killing millions of people.
I agree. We should have those discussions. Those discussions are important. But what I don't ever hear from anyone on our side of the issue is, what is the unacceptable risk? The assumption is always that, well, the risk is acceptable. And for this particular variant that we're dealing with now, that's may very well be the case. It seems to be the case. I agree with you. But at what point do you say, no, this risk is not acceptable? I mean, that is a question that literally nobody on our side ever answers. Nobody will say it. No one will say, well, it's XYZ%. Then at that point, I would be okay with doing X with this and that. And that's the thing. If you're not willing to come up with that, then it's a little bit disingenuous to be railing at the other side for having an unacceptable, view of risk when you don't have an actual answer to the question either.
I can answer that question very easily. There is no threshold in which I would be okay with that. Period. End of story. I don't care how dangerous or how contagious a disease is. At no point am I going to justify the violation of another person's individual liberties. Period.
Yeah,
End of story.
I am pretty much in line with Nate on that one. Like, people are rational animals, right? That will take the threats in and they'll lock themselves down. They don't need the government to do it. All of this boils down to the seatbelt law to me. It's like, do we really need the government to enforce a seatbelt law? Like, no, you take your own risk. You, if you're concerned about whatever, anything, legitimate concerns, absolutely legitimate concerns, you buckle your seatbelt yourself. We don't need the government.
You not buckling your seatbelt does not kill other people.
Sure,
so
it can.
It's not the same.
Sure, it can.
Not in the same way. You could literally have COVID theoretically and infect 50 people. You're not going to kill 50 people for not wearing a seatbelt.
But that's still part of the equation, right? Like, I'm going to go to the store. There's going to be 50 people there. Oh, I'm too nervous because I don't think those people are taking the precautions. I'm staying home. So
also, you have a much higher likelihood of dying in a car crash than you do from dying from COVID. Or to put it in the same analogy, you have a much higher likelihood of killing someone by not wearing a seatbelt than you do of killing someone by walking around unvaccinated or
but whatnot. We're talking about, I understand that, but you're talking about the existing variants of COVID. What I'm saying is, at what point, and you answered that, Nathan, you answered it. You said there is no point. But that's my question to everybody who's on the other side. Donnie, apparently you have it could kill 75% of people who contract it. You're saying I'm fine with that. So Jim, is it the same thing?
Thank you, Jim.
Is it if 90% of people who get COVID die, are you okay with not having mandates?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm going to be consistent on this. If it was 90% of the people that got COVID died, like I said, people would be stabbing the guy in front of them in line to get that vaccine
What if it
faster.
was 15%?
But the thing is,
because then it's not the same kind of scenario. What if it's 15%?
It still doesn't matter.
There's still going to be lots
You
of
should
people
not-
who
it
choose
should
not to
be-
get vaccinated.
you got to
It should
think of
not
that.
be. It should not be a condition to live, especially in the United States, to get especially in this case, experimental medicine in order to
Non-FDA
go outside or to live your life. That's not what a free society does. I'm sorry. And if there are costs to that, but there are also costs to having my freedom crushed by panic people and government bureaucrats. And I'm not willing to pay that price
If
anymore.
15% of the people who contract it die, I would argue that that's a legitimate reason to be panicky. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, and I would probably lock myself down in
we're-
my house.
But not right now.
that's
There's
the
no reason to
point.
panic now. It's ridiculous. We still are panicking now as a society, and there's no reason to. If 50% of the people that got COVID died like within a day, yes, that would actually be a justified panic, and people would be taking the measures necessary to protect themselves and their families. We are still acting as public policy as if this is the Black Death, that it's like some kind of zombie virus that you are instantly turned into a walking dead. That's not the case, and we need to say it. We need to say it out loud that the government should not be doing this because there's zero justification for it medically or statistically or any other way.
If the government wanted to initiate policies that put resources in place that, if you are high risk and you want to stay home and have no access to get food or something like that, we'll drop food off for you. Those are way more palatable ideas than if you go outside, you're going to get arrested. If you're paddle boating out on the ocean by yourself, we're going to arrest you.
I understand what you're saying.
If you're a big chicken, you stay home. The rest of us can go out and live our lives.
What I'm saying is, I think it's disingenuous to make the argument over and over and over again that this is all for nothing. It doesn't matter. Look at how low the infection rate is, blah, 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 which is the argument that you guys are making all the time. But then turn around and say, it doesn't even matter to me if it was 90% death rate. Because then what's the difference?
No, it's a huge difference.
Your position, no, because your position would be the same even if 90% of people were dying, or if 5% of people are dying, or if 0.1%.
The magnitude of ridiculousness would increase by that number, right? If it was 100%,
it
would be ridiculous. If it's 1%, it's 100 times more ridiculous. So
Justin, how many times we have to say that if the death rate was 90%, that you would need a mandate?
But you would if it was 10, and that's the point. That's the point that I make. Yeah, you would.
So.
Yeah,
10.
You would.
If 10 people, 10%.
Yep,
no.
I bet you would.
Right,
yep,
so that would mean millions of people are dying in the streets, and you think
literally
we would need a
we would have had
mandate.
30 million.
How many people have died? How many people have died already? How many people have died?
We've got.
Hold on.
How many people have
left.
died? Look it up.
And we have to actually address the question here: are the restrictions or the lockdowns, a new round of it, inevitable? Okay, Justin, based on what you're saying, I think your answer is yes, they're inevitable. We're going to have lockdowns again because politicians are weighing their options. And they think it's politically more feasible to live with a overreactive lockdown measure than an underreactive one, right?
Actually, no, not necessarily. I've told you this before, Donnie. I believe that I believe everything is driven by politics. Absolutely. Politically, what is the best case scenario for the Biden administration? I think actually the best case scenario for them from their perspective is that things actually improve and that he gets all the credit for it. And so I would argue that if I were creating a narrative, like a fictional narrative of what would be best for Joe Biden, it would be exactly what has happened so far. Things start to get better. We have this new variant. Because remember, up until this point, all the good things happening can be attributed to Donald Trump, all right? Because he's the one that presided over the creation of the vaccine and everything else. So we need another crisis in order to make sure that Trump is not the one that gets credit for everything going back to normal again. We get another temporary crisis, and then we come out of it sometime in, say, the fall or winter of this year, right before the next year, which is an election year. And Joe Biden, the economy starts to recover again in their minds. And Joe Biden gets all the credit for things returning back to normal. I'm not saying that that's reality or that he should deserve the credit or anything like that. I'm saying if I was going to create a narrative of how I would want this all to play out from the perspective of Joe Biden, that would be the case. I think the theory the competing theory is that no, they want everything locked down so that they can have their election rules in place that benefit them. And I think there's a valid argument to be made for that, except for the fact that this is too early for that. The right time for that to happen would be like 6 or 7 months from now, not now. So I'm not entirely sure if that's what they're going for, because
You're
this is
boldly
this is too
assuming that they're
early.
not going to keep these lockdowns going for another 6 or
I
7
think if
months.
they keep these lockdowns going for 6 or 7 months, no amount of election fraud will save them from
All right,
what's coming in 2022.
We got
That's
30
what I think
seconds
is
here,
happening.
and I want Jim and Nate to answer this question too. Jim, you first. Do you think that a new round of lockdowns are inevitable?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Ooh,
Well, boom.
you
And
owe me a
duet.
soda, Jim.
Fantastic. All right. Well, that's.
Yeah.
I think that's gonna do it. We're out of time here. Justin, I will say your philosophy around what we do in times of crisis is concerning to me. But again, we'll talk about
It
that
wasn't.
maybe in
I never talked about my philosophy.
in a
I never
future
said what my
episode.
philosophy
Poor
was.
Justin having his views misconstrued.
Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Send your hate emails to Jay Haskins at heartland.org. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. For those audio-only listeners, you're catching this on a Friday. If you want, you can catch it a day early. The video version, if you watch us on Facebook or on YouTube. And let's see. I think that pretty much does it. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
And Justin, same question.
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Socialist Twitter.
Nate Myers, you are a ghost of social media, so just join me in saying goodbye to the fine people.
Goodbye, fine people. And I would be remiss if I did not quickly mention that everybody should buy their tickets for the anniversary benefit dinner that is coming up very soon on September 24th. Get your tickets. James O'Keefe is going to be our keynote speaker, so you're not going to want to miss that.
No doubt, no doubt. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.